I really didn't get fascinated with design until I started to learn what it was and what it could actually do. I tend to think of design as a natural form of life. You think if a spider creates a web, or a bird develops a nest, or a bee a honeycomb. It's something that allows us to be able to create and develop and innovate things within our own ecosystem of life.
I think of design as like a bridge that connects complexity with meaning. Like on one side you have something very complex, could be a technology, could be a system, could be anything. And the other side you have a person. Design is that thin layer that connects complexity to meaning.
At its best, design is human. We're not artificially creating something just for the sake of it. That it stems from something that people actually need and want. It's not about, does it have drop shadows? Is it pretty? Is it skeuomorphic? It's more about the connection I have to it.
It's not pixels. It's not the nitty-gritty and using Photoshop or whatever tool you want. It's the act of intentionally solving problems.
It really takes a monumental step of improvement in order to get somebody to change the way that they're already living their lives. But I think once you've created something that is truly disruptive, that is way different and way better, people will notice it. And it's only a matter of time before a lot of people notice it and start using it.
As designers, really all we're doing is reflecting the world. As the world changes, the things that matter changes too.
This is Fresh Air. The return of the HBO series Silicon Valley
has our linguist Jeff Nunberg thinking about the language techies use, particularly the buzzword disrupt.
As is most everything else these days, disrupt and disruptive are ubiquitous in the names of conferences, websites, business school degree programs, business book bestsellers, and companies new and old.
It's Clay Christensen's idea of looking at an existing industry and doing it faster, doing it more efficiently, doing it more simply.
It's a view that chaos is delicious. It's about looking at a problem from new angles and solving old world problems using new world technologies.
That's what created an entry point for disruptive innovations like the Model T Ford, Craigslist Classifieds, Skype, and No Frills Airlines.
The word disruption for me is confidence in action. When you see true disruptors, they're people that are fearless. They're people that are not afraid to walk out in front of an audience and say, I do not have the answer, but I am not gonna quit until I find it. So it's the reason why I think people like the kid that has yet to be a founder, in the middle of Bangladesh, and she's thinking about her future. It's the reason why they compete, because this game is a competition, much like sports. Disruption is, I would say, the byproduct of improvisation. When you do something different, when you follow your gut, when you try to zig when everyone else zags, you, by sheer nature of momentum, move in a direction where other people aren't looking and create that what we call a wave of opportunities and a wave of impact and interest in new and different ways that people never thought could exist.
I definitely think of Lyft and the people here as innovators and innovating. I think it's really about understanding what those opportunities are to do something completely new and invent. I was employee number 20 officially, walking into something where I would have the opportunity to contribute to something new and build something from the ground up. That's, for me, was the greatest design challenge of all. For me, the story of Lyft starts with our co-founders, John and Logan. Both of them were experiencing different friction points as it related to transportation and communities. Both of them recognized that there's a huge amount of inefficiencies in how people are moving about their cities. People are driving around by themselves, the majority of their seats unoccupied, and then driving cars that for the most part sit unused. To them, I think there was this gigantic opportunity to do something about that.
Taxis did solve a human problem in terms of getting people around cities quickly and easily and cost effectively. But the great thing about these other services is that they make the taxi industry look like a human problem. They make people look at taxis and go, wow, why do I put up with this? Why do I put up with having to determine what tip to give somebody at the end of my ride? Why do I put up with something not showing up when it's supposed to show up? So by solving all of those customer service and user experience problems, modern day car services are making taxis look like a human problem that needs to be solved.
I remember my first driver was her name was Shannon, and she had like driving gloves and was like super excited about driving and the experience. And it was amazing that, when we launched the system, to see it all light up and then requesting your first ride, actually having the driver appear, watching them approach on the map, and then getting to where you got to go, it was awesome. The thought that you could do this and have this conversation and meet new people was pretty incredible. The pink mustache is actually something that's very near and dear to everyone here at Lyft. John, our president and co-founder, kind of burst through the conference room doors with a pink mustache, and at first everyone thought he was crazy, of course, but as it turns out, it was a brilliant move because it not only got people talking about the product, it got people excited about it and curious, and it became sort of a cultural symbol for us. It's really important that we design for both sides of the experience, both for the passenger side and the driver side, because each use case has very distinct challenges. When you're talking about a driver's experience, you have to be mindful of that sort of arm's length usability when they're out and about on the roads, picking passengers up and dropping them off. And so the UI and the experience needs to reflect that. Having people that are focused on that, living, eating, and breathing that experience, that's incredibly important. The same thing should be said about the passenger experience because they are distinct. And so you can't have one UI or one sort of treatment that works, across the board.
The role of the designer is constantly changing. It changes in relationship to the way business changes and the way technology changes. When technology is the thing you want, you don't need design because you want the better technology. When technology matures, you don't buy it just based on technology. In that case, design comes into the foreground.
What is product design? It's a big question, and designers come up with lots of terminology that really confuse the answer.
Designers like to invent all sorts of titles for themselves and all sorts of different ways to describe their little niche of the world.
I am a product designer.
I'm VP of Design.
Senior Experience Designer.
The Director of User Experience.
Product Design Director.
Robin, take one. Mark?
In reality, we're all designers and we're all solving problems in very similar ways.
I think for a product designer to be successful, at the core, they must be a great problem solver, period. A product designer thinks about solving problems for people and works really closely with technology and business constraints to bring those ideas to life.
Whether you're designing an app or a website or any kind of other digital product, that you're looking at kind of, are we building the right thing? And I think of design usually kind of in 4 tiers. You have visual design on the surface, what does it look like? You've got interface design, which is, where do all the bits go? You've got user experience design, which is, can people use this thing? And then you've got product design at the bottom tier, which is, are we even building the right thing? And does it fit into the entire context of both our product as well as someone's life?
I'm Tobias Van Schneider. I'm at Spotify in New York, and I'm a lead product designer right now. I'm one of those people who dropped out of high school when I was 15. I loved computers, and I started being a computer scientist and a software engineer. Eventually, I transitioned into design because I always was more concerned about the user experience. With the digital design or interaction design, you have the loop that you can close. When it comes to print, you put it out and you don't really know what the user thinks of what you did because there is no feedback loop. There's no data that I can collect really. It's much, much harder. With digital, there's always this loop. When I put it out there, the user does something and I get feedback and I can basically react and make it better and improve it.
It's no longer the case that you're just going to commit to a shrink-wrapped CD-ROM that comes out, once a year, and however it does, it does. Now that we can release products on a daily basis, update products on a daily basis, whether it's a web product or even a native mobile app, we're now holding ourselves accountable for design decisions that we may have gotten wrong along the way. Let's say we're creating a checkout form at the end of an e-commerce process. But as soon as we release it, maybe we look at the data and we realize that, wow, people in Brazil have a 0% completion rate on this form. Well, why is that? Oh, actually in Brazil, they don't use zip codes the same way we do. And we've made the zip code field required. And so since we have access to that information so quickly after we launch, it's our duty to not only look at it, but remedy all of those little things that we happen to get wrong along the way. And I guarantee you, every single designer, no matter how good they are, gets many, many things wrong along the way.
I'm in a position to see how design is used at many, many companies. We invest in 280 companies across a huge range of industries. The design challenges are immensely different between companies. But the one thing that we've seen over and over again is that the greatest power of design within an organization is to find ideas that are floating around all over the company and to take them down from being these amorphous, difficult to understand, difficult to talk about issues and make them into a tangible item that can actually be talked about. So we do a process at Google Ventures called a design sprint. It's a week-long design exercise that takes you from having inklings of ideas or worries about risks and or potential successes and go and validate those with customers by the end of the week.
The other thing that we do is we set this time pressure because designers and everyone like to make stuff beautiful. We like to spend all the time crafting it, but often that's not the right thing to do. So what we do on the first day is we create a deadline for ourselves. So before we've even designed anything, we've got the end goal, right? We're gonna show this thing to people. And that just puts you in gear. You're like, I have to design something good in 4 days because people are coming into the office.
So we recently did a design sprint with Blue Bottle Coffee. And their big question was, how do you sell coffee beans on the internet? Surprisingly, not a very solved problem. When you're presented with 20 brown bags of coffee and they're all similar price, how do you choose which one is the right one for you?
Our brains are not very good. You can only remember 5 to 7, maybe 10 things in your head. So by making a room your sort of shared brain, you can really sort through a lot more ideas.
We're not talking about these ideas. We're not arguing with each other. We're not getting intense and people appear to be very creative when they're brainstorming, but really they're creating groupthink and they're arguing with each other and they're convincing each other of mediocre ideas being excellent.
So let's just do 2 votes. You have to pick only 2 ideas that you want to work on for the rest of the week.
We want people to stop and really think alone which opportunity is the one that they think has the most potential.
So the distinction between interactive design and digital product design and user experience is all a bit blurry, but when people use the word user experience, it usually means more of how the customer comes through the whole product, all the different touch points that are involved, from maybe in a store to on the web to on your phone. We first started thinking about all of this when humans and machines started working together, right? And that was on assembly lines. Old time motion studies of workers working with their machines and figuring out how to make everything more efficient. Fast forward a bit, the next time we started to really think about design was in aviation. And the government was trying to figure out why were planes crashing? We have these very complex machines and these very skilled operators, and still these planes were crashing. So how can we design that interface to be better and safer? But now, it's so different. Now we're not looking at skilled operators, people who are used to using that interface over and over again, more the general people, like, can you just walk up and use something? Can it feel simple? That's the challenge of interaction design.
Every day, people are increasingly feeling more overwhelmed by all the information that they have around them. So simply making your product easier to open or easier to turn on are now opportunities for user experience designers. Like, how could I make this experience more frictionless and save this person some time? Saving time is sexy now, right?
10 years ago, the title of user experience wasn't actually invented yet. As this field has become more mature, we've migrated from this emphasis on the craft and more into the what. Why are we actually doing this? What is the actual output that we want? Forget about how. And so you're having these methods of rapid prototyping and whiteboard it out and call that a design. That's actually okay now, where before it wasn't okay to do that. You had to be a Photoshop ninja. That's not the case anymore. Now it's everyone kind of is a designer as long as they can produce the idea and articulate that for everyone else.
Years ago, design was being in a process where product manager or some other person in the company came to a designer to ask how to execute on a given solution, but now designers are actually asked to be part of defining what the solution is from the beginning.
So whether it's a product or service, if you get in at that initial meeting and you're there when you're hearing all these business problems that are being brought up, you can hopefully not only get a better understanding of what you're trying to solve for, but see the future down the road. So if you're designing for something, you can not future-proof it. I don't necessarily like that phrase because I don't think anything is future-proof, but you can design with the idea of having a roadmap in mind.
We're focusing this week on innovation on the West Coast, and I figured to find innovators, there's no better place to go than Silicon Valley.
Mark Zuckerberg partnered with architect Frank Gehry to design MPK 20, Menlo Park Building Number 20. The goal was to be eco-friendly and reflect Facebook's mission to connect people. Gehry created the largest open floor plan in the world, and Facebook commissioned local artists to decorate it.
So as you can see, it's all kind of open, very tied to the way we design our product. This is my desk. This is Julie Zhu. When we think about designing products, we're trying to tap into things that are natural and to like and share things, to give affirmation. These are things that existed well before Facebook did. The pixels that were sweated in creating those buttons is really important, but their creation and being is more about how we think about how people connect and less about how a button looks.
I think the biggest challenge is understanding how to design less and less for myself and more for people who are different from me. Because when I joined Facebook, I was just fresh out of college. And so in a lot of ways, all of us who were working at Facebook, we were just designing the product that we wanted to use with our friends who were all of the similar age and background. And soon, my parents were joining and my grandparents were joining and people in Brazil and India and all of the world were joining. And it became harder and harder for me to think of myself as the average user at Facebook. There's no such thing as an average user at Facebook anymore.
As designers, the decisions we make, we like to think shape the future, but actually I think it's that we're proposing alternate futures and people actually decide whether that's going to stick or not.
The world's fastest newspaper press is in the plant of the biggest newspaper in the United States, the New York Daily News.
One thing that's interesting is you see new mediums come up through history. Radio didn't replace newspapers. TV didn't replace radios. Movies didn't replace anything. Every medium got more specific and got better at its particular form of communication, but nothing went away.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
It just so happens that we live in a time where there's an explosion of new medium types. And not only the web is a medium type, not only mobile is a medium type, but Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest. Like, people are trying to figure out what all these different mediums mean. 50 years we'll look back and we'll say that was an amazing 20 years. And we're just living in the middle of it.
20 years ago, we all had pagers, and when someone would page us, we'd have to find a landline and like call on the landline to see what someone wanted. And that was just 20 years ago. We now live in this world where all of a sudden the smartphones that we have are allowing us to share emotions, share moments, have friends and family with us wherever we go. And so the challenge for designers is, how do you make those things effective and useful and additive, as opposed to isolating and detrimental and maddening?
Product design is important right now because it's the gateway to the wealth of information unlocked by the internet. It's literally what humanizes that massive set of information and makes it useful. One thing that's really important to me is that Pinterest, the product, stays very simple as we make it more and more useful. We're trying to build a product that everyone in the world can use one day, and that really changes your perspective. If you have to band-aid your product with a lot of user education or explanation, it can be fine, but it means you don't have a great design. The product should be self-evident aspirationally. It's really inspiring to me in the software world that, a couple people working a few more hours can really make the whole experience better for everyone in the world without any extra costs. There's no such thing as a luxury software design product, right? Great design, if it's a free product, is free for everyone.
I believe that design has become so analogous with the way that we live. It's so intuitive. It's so much a part of the way that we interact with things that we don't even really notice that it exists. And that's actually a good thing. But, it's a bad thing because then people don't really realize the value. It's got more skills. I thought I was good at this. I'm the designer. Ain't I supposed to be quicker at this than you? All these things have been designed for us to help us live productive lives. At Interact Project, it's like, that's what our focus is. And our focus is really working with young people to let them know that these careers exist. And there's so many. It's just about really using creative and critical thinking skills to be able to solve something.
First got interested in computers because of the Commodore PET, but it was pretty underpowered. Really was text-based, and text was graphics at the time. But when the Apple II came out, you could make things in color.
I was really fascinated with illustration, and I discovered PaintShop Pro and then moved on to Photoshop, pirated of course at the time, because I wanted to just draw and use the different tools to create art.
The one moment where it really took off, or kind of was like a turning point, was watching Jurassic Park. So I was like a little kid, I was like 13, 14, in the theater looking at these giant dinosaurs and starting to think like, well, how did they do that? How did they make that?
Technology and sort of an intimate relationship with making software or taking apart hardware or any of these things has always been a part of my experience.
I didn't quite know what design was, but I knew computers and art came together to make that.
I didn't know what design was. No one had ever told me. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and I didn't have someone walk into my art classroom and say, you, son, can be a designer. But what I did have was people who were extremely creative. My mother's a great example of that. She leveraged what we had in our home to create opportunities for us to dream and believe in ourselves.
One day I was at Texas Instruments as a summer intern, engineering intern, and one of the admin assistants said to me, oh, you're pretty good at design. You should be a designer. I said, what's that?
I started design at a really early age, in fact, high school. I purposely took graphic design in summer school. It's where I first learned how to work with old school ways of design, graphic design, right? Ruby Lith, pay steps. I've shot my own film and developed it, did screen printing, all the stuff that was even pre-computer. The first time I really started getting paid
to do design was when I was a starving musician. And I ended up doing flyers and demo album covers for other bands. For me, that was a great way of making the transition between fun design and being paid to do it, which really sort of changed the way I thought about design as an industry, as a career, as a tool. It made a big difference.
Art and design are completely different. Design is about making solutions. Art is about making questions. So in art, you can make something that doesn't make any sense, which is okay. In design, you have to make sense.
The thought of letting a stranger spend the night in your living room may sound creepy, but to some people it's good business in a tough economy. Several internet websites now connect homeowners with travelers looking for a cheap place to crash.
I was in Silicon Valley looking for a new job, and I met the Airbnb founders, and two of them were designers, and I just thought, I'll learn more about product and building great products sitting next to two designers in an apartment than I will, being a product manager at a bigger company. So I joined as a third engineer. It was 3 founders, 3 engineers. And over the last 5 years, I've just completely opened my mind to what design's about. Before I came to Airbnb, I thought that design was something done in Photoshop only, that it was about making pixels look pretty. What I didn't realize is that design is about every touch point a customer has with your service. We have this internal tool called Snow White, inspired by Disney, who was the first to use storyboards. And we thought that we could bring storyboards to the product design process. So we hired a Pixar storyboard artist to help us bring all these moments across the entire Airbnb experience to life. Here's an example of checking in, sort of helps us think through, okay, well, how do we bring more clarity and more design to this exact frame?
One of the reasons why we focus so much on the user journey is so that we can think about how we can better design for a moment early in the journey that's going to help another moment later on in the journey. We don't try to tell you everything at once. We want to give you a welcome mat. We want to make sure you know what you're looking at and what we provide. And then we can progressively disclose certain pieces of information as you move through the funnel.
Once you draw the entire end-to-end story, a lot of times design problems emerge that you never saw before. We've all been hyper-focusing on that thing here, but turns out that 3 frames earlier, that's actually where the problem begins.
I think what makes great design is design that's transparent, design that you're not thinking about, design that simply works, that gets out of the way, design that's not full of itself.
I think the best design is completely invisible. You don't even notice it. You just go about using whatever product it is that you're using and you enjoy it and you don't even think about it.
It's not that good design's completely invisible. I think that it makes you feel a certain way. I think sometimes we see design and we actually like seeing it. We're using these apps because they're beautiful, because they have great illustration or great colors, or they have this emotional connection, but we're not necessarily conscious of it.
I'm not convinced that differentiation can really happen by having an aesthetically pleasing device, because within seconds, they're commoditized. Within seconds, someone else came up with a beautiful device. It's really at the system level. How does the device and how does the design fit into a grander system of the user's sort of relationship with technology? So you can have a beautiful Fitbit, which is awesome, and it's very well designed for everyday use. I can wear it all day, but it needs to fit within my entire health system for it to be something I love and something I really want to use every single day.
I was a user of Dropbox before I joined Dropbox. The first time I dropped a file into that folder and that little circle started to sync, and then there was a point in the check mark. It's like, what just happened here? And then I opened it on my iPhone and there was the same file. It had synced. It was simple, it was very clear, it just blew my mind.
Dropbox, when they started, Drew and Arash came to pitch us on this idea of file sync and storage.
At that time, there were already 15 or 20 different file storage solutions that were out in market. But Drew and Roush had a very crisp and precise vision around the end-user computing model of the future, syncing files across your devices so that you had access to them no matter what device you were accessing from.
Obvious is not something that is easy to come by. Obvious is the result of a process and a result of a lot of iteration in the design process to get to a place where something just works. It just simply is obvious. And so to do it for Dropbox, it was really about understanding what the user was trying to do in the first place. You know, we put files into folders and we understand that model. We understand the relationship of those two things. So if we want to then put something into the cloud, why not just do it via putting it into a folder that is automatically synced with the cloud? Why learn a whole new way of putting something in a place?
People already had folders before, and they use folders. And we only did something that they were using before.
They took a strong design philosophy to their approach. This wasn't just about solving the core file compression technology and the really hard problems of pushing files across multiple different operating systems. They wanted to bury all of that complexity but expose just a very simple UI to the end user where they could find their files simply, and more importantly, they could trust that their files were on every device that they were going to access them from.
It's now widely recognized that great experiences will benefit businesses at the end of the day. Technology is so much better than it was even 5 years ago that just technology and stitching together some use cases is not going to cut it. We put cars on the map because there has to be some level of precision in the context of something that feels familiar. You can innovate and try things that are pretty out there, but at the end of the day, you kind of have to come back to things that are also familiar and help build that sense of confidence and trust. If we can nail this concept of reliability and helping people get over the social hurdles of ride sharing with humanizing drivers, for example, you start to then begin to break down those walls.
We're moving from a world where vendors were building products for the sake of getting license revenue in the door to an end user model of innovation. Companies now need to have a recurring relationship with the end user and be very respectful of the way they work.
Back in 2008, when I started at MailChimp, I focused a lot on the language and trying to imbue the app with our personality. And there's one page in particular that was a really important one to me, and that was after you've designed an email and you've sent it, that's a stressful experience. It just feels like I need a beer. I'm done. It's celebratory and it feels great. And I wanted to acknowledge that and wrote a small thing. It just says, high fives, your email is on its way. High fives. And then we did a redesign and we simply added a drawing of Freddie giving a high five. It literally was a conversation that took 20 minutes, run over to an illustrator, Illustrator drew it, and an hour later we had this high five image in the app when we shipped. And it went out and we got so many tweets and photos on Instagram and comments on Facebook and emails that came in, videos that people were shooting, high-fiving their monitor. It created such a huge response that it just resonated, being aware of the emotional context of that situation. You know, if it came too early when you're in that stressful workflow, it becomes a hindrance. But afterwards, you know, when you do feel triumphant, that's when it really works.
Once you get that first taste of a feature catching on, you get that dopamine hit and it makes you want to build more and more features that catch on. But if you're not careful, the cognitive overhead of your product gets so large that the new user using your product for the first time doesn't really know how to make sense of it anymore. My favorite features are the features that actually take elements away. Whether you're removing a button or removing a menu or removing an entire screen from your help center that explains how something works. The subtractions are the most valuable additions to your product.
When the cost of leaving and switching to a competitor is essentially zero, a designer has the responsibility of protecting the user's attention span. You need to add a lot of things in order to generate great ideas, but then you need to have the maturity to remove most of those things to make something impactful that people will remember.
There are times where the extra flourish is actually a burden. That's a point where, you make that sacrifice. A good designer will know, I need to make that sacrifice here, because if everything is embellished, if everything shouts for my attention, then nothing is important.
Our customers are just hugely diverse, from small businesses to banks and the government. Part of our job is to give them the tools to have huge groups of people interact with the same system. So if you think about it like, if the files on your computer are a mess and not saved in any particular order, it's probably fine. You have systems for finding those and it's not a big deal. But if your doctor's office or the IRS didn't have naming conventions and systems for storing and accessing information, it would be chaos. Consistency is so important to our products. We're not the company who moves fast and breaks things. We have too many customers in really stable, mature markets that, for them, updating a screen could cost them millions in retraining their users. So that's something that we always need to be conscious of. And as a fine line to walk when we're trying to constantly bring new things into the world.
People have a connection with Facebook that is very deep, and people spend a lot of time on Facebook and they have an ownership over it, it's theirs. And so when we make small changes, they matter to people. In the early days of Facebook, a lot of people were visiting their friends' profiles and trying to understand the things that had changed from the last time they'd visited. The idea of newsfeed, which is not an idea that I came up with, but the team that worked on it at the time took all those things that had changed and put it in a single stream. And at the time, I think it was actually very coldly received. And over time, it became something that is by far our most successful feature and really the backbone of the experience that people have on Facebook.
When we design, we always put the customer's needs first. Whether it's using user research to find out what those needs are, or whether we're just collecting data or doing A/B testing to see what they care about more, we're always factoring in what they want.
Eventbrite's created a platform where people can do things that they were just never able to do before. I like to joke that our core competitor was actually like a spreadsheet and email and telephone calls, and then scale that out to 200 or 2,000, like it's a nightmare. And so I think that for that reason, people were just like, thank God Eventbrite. I think that always asking why, over and over and over again really gets to the base of what it is that you're trying to do. And it's like from there that you can start to actually really solve the real problem.
For Coursera, the product story, I think, is about creating a world where there's universal access to the world's best education. I don't feel like our mission is to just unearth all the universities in the world and make them go away. I think we want to just amplify the volume in the surface area of people that can learn.
There's more competition, there's more noise on the internet. There's so many products that in order to really stand out from the competition, the product needs to be simple and it needs to be attractive and it needs to really convey the essence of what it's trying to deliver to consumers.
I tell the team here, get through as many ideas as you can and do ideas that are silly that you won't be able to ship, but you have to just go into that part of your head and scoop that idea out because something cool could come out of it later in another way. There's not a magic design genie that when everyone leaves at night, we go rub and the great ideas pop out. We have to grind through bad ideas just like engineers or product managers do. The fail fast to succeed sooner, right? Failure's okay. You have to tell designers
Not all your ideas, especially not your first ideas, are going to be great.
You know, we talk about disruption in the software world, in the app world, in the product world, and everyone thinks they invented it. It's like kids who think they invented cursing. We didn't invent it. It's been around a long time. Apple is the poster child, but in the grand scheme of things, they're a new disruptor.
In December 1947, a new technology is born, something called the transistor.
Because of the transistor, it will very easily be possible for people to have in their home computers and communications all over the country for very low cost.
There have been periods of time where technology has changed in such a way that design is able to almost piggyback on it or partner with it. Mid-century designers, Charles and Ray Ames, they were able to create disruptive design because they were able to take advantage of advancements in plastics and polymers and things that didn't exist, 5 years earlier. People are able to be disruptive currently with the internet and mobile technology and things like that.
Bringing together people and place with technology, I think that only could have been possible with the advent of mobile and GPS.
Blockbuster expected to file bankruptcy any moment now.
Sharing economy is extending into business trips. Researchers say Uber and other services are quickly winning over those traveling for work.
A lot of the really disruptive companies chose not to play by the rules of a particular industry. There has just been the way you've always done things for 100 years, and anytime there's sort of pain or friction in an experience that seems needless, or it's only supporting someone at the very tippy top of an organization, is ripe for disruption.
Disruption is always occurring. It happens in nature. It's a normal thing. And it's those people who can adapt to when messes occur, who can navigate around them, navigate through them, that ultimately do great things.
The barriers to entry for a lot of these industries have almost entirely disappeared. The amount of infrastructure that you need to build a product these days is so much less than it was even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, let alone 50 years ago.
I think about 10, 15 years ago, if you were starting a startup, you would literally hire someone to build machines. They would sit there and get the hard drive and the logic board and the case, and they'd put it together and they'd put it in a server rack. And today, if you're building that same startup, you literally take out your laptop, do a few lines, and you have hundreds of machines running all around the world close to your customers. You're ready to go.
And so subsequently, a lot of people make products that probably shouldn't be making products, or bad ideas come to market very quickly because it's just easy. But it's still really, really hard to make a great product, to make something that's really fantastic, that resonates with an audience. Great is still really hard to come by.
So what we're going to draw now is actually 4 potential solutions to some of the big challenges that we put on the Post-it notes. And so it's usually user sees something, they do something, and then the system reacts in some way. And so people are going to think more holistically about how a user might move through the system to solve the problem that we're trying to solve. The way we typically see startups working, and many software companies work this way, it's kind of the San Francisco culture of product development, is that what you do is you first come up with an idea, and then you engineer that idea, you launch that idea, and then you measure it. But that's broken in a few ways.
So often we're wrong about the guesses that we make about how human beings are going to use our product. And so oftentimes it's a waste to spend 6 to 12 months designing a product before getting it even to prototype stage and in front of human beings and user research.
We don't know the answer. We have a guess at the answer. We actually don't know what the best solution is. It could be a very, very basic prototype that has one clickable button, and you really just want to know, is that the button they're going to click when they want to accomplish this task? Getting that as quickly as possible in front of a user is just incredibly powerful for us.
We have to prototype everything. We have to push it until it breaks or where we find our weakness. You know, the best products have incessantly tested and prototyped their products to the point where they've eliminated any risk from the equation.
At this point, we have all these sketches and we have to put them into a storyboard form.
It'll look like the New York Times open on the person's screen. The article is like 4 roasters you should know about. We're gonna start at this level of fidelity, and then when we're prototyping, we wanna raise it up to the level where it suspends disbelief. So when the user's looking at it, they just think it's a website. So here we're testing out this theory that people can choose coffee by choosing how they make coffee. When they click, we need to do some sort of loading animation-y, fakey thing and make it look like we filtered down the coffees, even though it's, again, all just sleight of hand. One of the results we found, which was very surprising, was that when people got to this screen, they didn't even read all the text. They'd only been on the page for 15 seconds, and several of them said, oh, wow, these people really know coffee. And our researcher looked at them and was like, oh, what makes you say that? And they're like, oh, I mean, look at how well they've described it. And you're like, wow, like they didn't even read it, but the fact that it was there was very influential in terms of how much they trusted this brand of coffee. On the Friday, we brought in users for a user study. We ran them through the prototype, and we found out that 5 out of 5 customers, when they were presented with this interface, immediately intuited how to choose coffee. So instead of actually engineering and launching a product, if you create a prototype and then put it in front of customers, you can do this in like a week. Now you can be much more confident that the idea that you came up with is the right idea. And usually the first idea you come up with isn't the right idea. It's in the right direction, but then you iterate and then you iterate again. And now you feel like you're pointing in the right direction. And then you throw all of your effort behind pursuing that. And that's when you can be very, very powerful, very dangerous to the incumbents, I think, when you operate like that.
Do you know the story of the pike and the minnow? There's an aquarium with a pike swimming around in it, and if you drop a minnow, it'll just like eat up the minnow. But if you put those minnows in a bottle, a glass bottle, and lower the bottle into the aquarium, the pike can't see the glass, so it'll try to eat the minnows, but just smack off the glass. It'll try again and again, and after a couple hours, it thinks, I guess minnows aren't things that I can eat. But then after it's learned that if you remove the glass and you set the minnows free, they'll just float right by the pike's face. He's learned that he can't eat a minnow anymore, but there's a tasty meal right there for him. And that's kind of like how the markets change, right? We just get used to stuff. We get used to the thermostat on our wall being shitty. We get used to it being hard to get around our city. It takes a special kind of business and a special kind of designer, honestly, to keep pushing at those things. So we'll know when something as subtly has changed about our environment and a new thing is possible.
We're currently in a market where anyone can create an app or anyone can create the next big thing. A one-person development team can create the next big game app that a 500-person studio couldn't even imagine. And competition is good ultimately. Like, you don't want that huge monolithic company to be kind of that slow to adopt. And that was kind of Google for a while too, where they were kind of this big company and people were kind of ragging on them, but now they're hitting on all strides because they have a lot of competition surrounding them. And I think they're probably doing their best design that they've done in a long time.
When Larry Page came to be CEO, one of his most purposeful first acts was to challenge the company, and in particular the UX team, with creating one beautiful Google. You know, think about how to bring our suite of 40 plus products together and make them feel like they come from the same company. We're not just working on one product, we're working on many products, but they have to actually work well together, for our customers and our users.
Salesforce is a company that was started by a guy named Mark Benioff. The idea was really for him, how do you take an experience like an Amazon.com and apply that to the enterprise space? So the idea is that you can log into this website and you always have the most current version of your enterprise software.
A third of the human condition is work. Every day we spend at least 8 hours doing stuff, managing files, accessing information, and tracking processes. We feel this is an extremely important place for great UX. People spend, a couple minutes a day hailing a taxi, and there's so much talent devoted to that problem. We're excited to bring great experience to people trying to get their work done every day.
When I come in the morning to do whatever it is I have to do at work, I didn't magically put on my I need crappy software hat. I want great stuff, and in fact, I want better stuff when I'm at work than I want when I'm at home. I have more time and more patience when I'm at home than I do when I'm at work.
Our premise is that why can't we do work and have an experience that puts a smile on your face, that feels like the experience you have with consumer software?
I think with the introduction of the iPhone, kind of everything changed. The entire landscape changed. People were able to make a product, not overnight, but in a very short amount of time. And there's a really strong visual language, and there's a really strong UX language, and a lot of people learned that way. A lot of people learned, Apple had great guidelines for how to do these things.
Back in the web, it was like the Wild West. You tried to make a nav and you weren't sure, should I put it on the left, should I put it on the top, should it be drop downs? Very first iPhone, there were 5 icons at the bottom of every app, and that was your nav. You didn't have to think about it too hard. So in a lot of ways, mobile was a bit easier.
Designers were freed up from kind of redesigning and reinventing the basic constructs of applications, and that allowed us to use patterns much more quickly and start thinking more holistically about how we fit in people's lives. And even more importantly, because mobile devices let us unchain ourselves from our desks, all of a sudden we were thinking much more contextually about how to design for people. Oh, my user's probably on the bus trying to read the news. They're bouncing around and trying to focus on this thing. They've only got about 10 minutes between where they got on the bus and where they're gonna get off the bus. And now we started designing in much more rich ways that took humans and their normal environment into context a lot more clearly. At the same time, I think mobile also limited our abilities a lot. You're on this tiny little screen, it doesn't give us a large canvas to design on. And in a lot of ways, designers thrive on constraints. And mobile was this brand new, wonderful constraint. And I think it really let designers, and as well as product people, the CEOs, the entrepreneurs, really focus what they were trying to do and then execute on that limited vision in a much richer way.
I think the way that we look at success here, it really goes back to, I think, the way that we design here, which really is problem focused. So we look at, okay, what are the problems that our users are having? And if we fix that problem, then that's success. I think things like responsive web really made us consider, oh shit, how do we go from possibly a 1920 screen down to the world's tiniest Samsung Android device that you have to support?
I think that there's vast differences between designing for 10 foot and designing for a 10-inch experience. If it's in my hand, if it's my phone or my tablet, it's very personal to me. Phones are something that are often right next to people, and they're almost a representation of who they are as a person. So designing for that versus 10 foot is much more of a social experience. So I might be watching with friends and family. So ways that we can make the decision process easier on selecting a title. Those are things that we need to think about when we're designing for a larger format like a TV.
Unlike most fields of design, architecture, graphic design, industrial design, product design isn't about making something timeless, right? If you build a great building, a great house, that's timeless. A great poster is timeless. A great object is timeless in a way. Product design disappears after several years.
I just think that timelessness ends up in museums. So we were creating art that can be timeless. Design is not art. Needs evolve. Humans evolve. Design should evolve.
One of the interesting things historically with design is that designers used to craft an individual product. If I go to Heath Ceramics, for instance, they've been around since the 1930s. Some of those mugs were designed 70 years ago and have hardly changed, and they're still exquisite. But in the digital era, we've gotten beyond this idea of thinking about individual unchangeable objects. So instead of trying to craft this perfect aesthetic or get the typography just perfect, what instead we're doing is we're trying to build excellent systems that are extremely adaptable. I build it today, and then I watch how you use it, and then I build it even better tomorrow, and then I watch how you use that. All of a sudden, mobile phones come on the scene, and people change their habits and expect things to work differently. Well, that's fine. I'll change the product entirely.
I love this idea of this long-term relationship with the design problem. You get to see all of its nuances, learn from it over time and try it over and over again as it changes. I love that. I love that there's this sort of body of knowledge unique to that problem space, and that you can really treat the product as a living organism, and sort of continue to revisit it and nurture it.
The biggest mistake I see designers make is fall in love with their own work. The moment it's your baby and the moment you're unwilling to change it, it's already done. Because the whole point is for other people to love it, other people to experience it, not for you.
I think empathy for your users or the people that use your product is critical because you're creating it for them, not for you, for them. And so if you don't understand their context, their needs, their perceptions, how they think about things, how they feel when they use your product, what are you designing? What are you making?
Recently, I switched to using an Android phone just because I know that that's what the audience that we are designing for more and more are using. On Tuesdays at the office, we have this thing called 2G Tuesdays where you will open up Facebook and there'll be a little thing at the top of the screen that says, hey, it's 2G Tuesdays. Do you want to experience what somebody who lives in India, what their data connectivity is like for an hour? It's painful, and it helps us understand where the shortcomings of our product are for people in these markets that aren't using the latest and greatest devices with the fastest Wi-Fi.
As soon as we get into the world of 100 million people using your product, or 200 million people using your product, or 1 billion people using your product, most of the people using your product, 99% of them in fact, are nothing like you. They're halfway across the world, in Indonesia, in India, using a very cheap phone. And the only way to really get inside the heads of those users is to get on the ground and talk to them.
Look at the work of Pablo Picasso. If he didn't go to Africa, would he be doing that stuff? No. It's because he realized the importance of being exposed to other cultures. If you look at the world of work of Frank Lloyd Wright, if he didn't go to Japan, he would never design in that way. And so great designers, great creatives have always known that they have to find different people to be with, to be uncomfortable. So diversity is vital. It is the opportunity in tech right now.
Silicon Valley is a place that operates on data, hard facts and numbers. Reports from Google, Yahoo, LinkedIn, and more all show a tech industry with demographics that are way out of whack with the nation and tech consumers.
This has been something that we've been thinking about for a very long time. Everybody coming together as a unified front about what can we do to actually make a dent in diversity in design.
An article came out in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago. It was called, "Has Diversity Lost Its Meaning?" I want to start with you, Kimberly. So, in your opinion, has diversity lost its meaning?
It's still very real to me in terms of what I see on the landscape when I look around me. It's been interesting to see how companies have really latched on to kind of the diversity train now. And everyone's hiring, diversity, a VP of diversity or a lead of diversity. And it's quite interesting in the couple of years that this has happened. Because the numbers are not changing. So, so I'm really wondering, like what are these people doing on a day-to-day basis? And can I get one of those jobs? Because I work very hard.
And so is it just me, or does it feel like design is left out of the conversation in technology and innovation?
In a lot of ways, it's because we've bifurcated creativity and design. So creativity is what you do when you're disenfranchised or you're poor. Well, it's very creative, kid. But in order to be a designer, you have to be an elitist or have a certain accent or go to a certain school or look a certain way. And to me, I think we've taken away the ability to point out natural behaviors that are design behaviors. So that's how I view it. The world is diverse. So if we're not thinking about diversity, then we're not thinking about people. If we're not thinking about people, then we're not designers. We're makers of stuff. So there's a saying that we used to use at Nike that all of us are smarter than one of us. And so if all of us means that there's someone who represents this group, that group, that group, that group, we're gonna attack the problem in a unique way. And we're gonna show up completely different than our competitors.
The biggest challenges designers are facing right now is the fact that they're designing a lot of things that are new, that have not been done before, in organizations that are evolving and changing, for audiences that are evolving and changing. And so there's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of moving parts to keep in mind. You're also being asked to do more and more beyond design, thinking about, is this a good thing for the world? So there's like design ethics that a lot of people talk about now, thinking strategically about how your design affects the business of the company that you're within.
And this is actually something which we designers still struggle, is because deep in our heart, a lot of designers are also artists. Maybe they're failed artists, and that's why they ended up in design. So we are very, very emotional, and we don't really, we're not that much on the side of, business objectives and business requirements. When it comes to being a good designer or being good design, you have to be interested in the business aspects as well as a designer.
There's certainly a popular and sort of business press dialogue about design-led or design-driven companies. And I actually believe that the most impactful ones pass through or sort of sidestep that arc, right? Where they're not actually about design, it's just that design is embedded. We arrive at a place where it feels more like oxygen.
So we think design thinking is really important to the startups that we invest in. Even if there isn't a core design DNA on the founding team, at least is there an understanding of the design process on the founding team.
Companies are starting to get closer to the idea that if you can create an amazing experience, it's going to help improve your business. And I think that wasn't something that was so clear even 5 years ago.
Say like maybe 3 years ago, designers were always worried about being at the table. We're always kind of complaining like we don't have a voice, people don't listen to us, engineers kind of, have the upper hand. It's not the case anymore. In fact, if you're a designer that believes that you don't have a seat at the table, you're not listening.
There's never been a time in history where design and entrepreneurship have been like more interconnected. There's a number of billion-dollar quality products that have been brought to market by designers, and that's a new phenomenon. Venture capitalists want to take a part in that.
Somehow this intersection of like huge markets to like what change in the world we actually want to see. So that for us, this is like kind of the meaningful impact.
The thing that gets us out of bed every morning, the thing that we're most passionate about, are designers taking on meaningful problems. We like to invest in companies that are bringing design to underserved areas. So a great example is Omada Health. Omada is a diabetes prevention platform, and they're a company where the better they do, the more lives they save.
The current solution is a brick and mortar, like DPP program. There is literally no software that exists for that particular program.
Now that we realize the importance of design, with companies like Apple to Tesla to Facebook, people are listening. People are willing to support more design innovation, willing to invest in it. Now it's like, we gotta show the results.
5, 10, 15 years ago, entrepreneurs that we were seeing were targeting a lot of the same industries, but trying to reimagine those industries. So, hey, I'm building the next gen logistics software business, or I'm building the next gen CRM business. Now, not a day or a week goes by that we don't see some new startup in some crazy part of the economy that we've never touched before. Data-driven farming and agriculture. You look at the rise of the drone and robotic space. These are things that have literally just sprung up in the last 2 to 3 to 4 years and are targeting parts of the economy that literally haven't been touched in the past century.
We're just scratching the surface right now. If you walked into a hospital and asked doctors like, hey, are you delighted by the electronic medical records software that you use? If you talk to teachers and say, hey, are you stoked by the educational software that you use? The vast majority are not still excited by the stuff that they have. And so there's still a long way for us to go. And then beyond that, right, there's all the new technology that's coming out, whether that be virtual reality or all these other experiences. I think, 5, 10 years down the line, sure, but there's still a huge opportunity for us as designers right now.
I'm excited to see the future because the climate and the timing is right, and the issues that people want to solve, they have the tools now to do it in a free and efficient and scalable way. And so we're going to see a generation of social entrepreneurs who create benefit corps that have double bottom line return and shake up the world in terms of how they serve their consumer.
I think really looking outward is the best thing that designers and anybody involved in product development can do. Understanding that the world and how the world is changing and how the world's response to new technologies are changing, and not getting too comfortable with any perceived success in any one area, because it'll change tomorrow and there will be another better version of whatever you thought you successfully did. There will be. So I think it's super important for us as designers and researchers to understand what people want.
The questions now aren't, can we build it? Because more and more we can, yes, the answer is yes, we can build anything. The question is, what will make us happy? What will make us fulfilled? What is the future that we want to build together?
Envision is a window into everything that's being designed within Twitter.
As a tool, Envision really helps us test and prototype, and it helps us understand if what we're trying to do as designers would actually work.
Envision's helped us in many ways. One is just developing prototypes that enable us to get early signals before we actually write any code.
Within days of thinking about a problem that we want to attack, we can get something in front of a user.
Envision's most useful to us when we're working on something that's got some complexity to it.
Design starts taking this extra dimension where it's not necessarily about the space on a page, but a user's walk through time with that product. And that's where Envision helps.
It's allowed us to have design have a better platform in the company.
Everyone's on it, and that's not just design, that's engineering, that's product managers, QA. There's this shared understanding, shared thinking about the decisions that we're making. It's changed the way we design.
I absolutely think that Envision has helped my team collaborate better.
It's right there, this is where the comment is, and this is the answer to that one comment.
It's helped me to communicate my thoughts, my ideas as a designer.
Envision is a faster way to certainty.
It's a tool that allows us to bring design to life.
Envision is a game-changing design tool for us at HubSpot.
It's absolutely been essential to us, and now we just can't live without it.